Day after day, television images show acts of violence committed by members of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant terror group, also known as ISIS or ISIL. Iraqi men in civilian clothes and also in army uniforms have been paraded by the militants and sometimes even executed by them as they occupy cities and towns across that war-torn land. In one film, militants belonging to the Takfiri group kill an Iraqi officer who refuses to repeat slogans chanted by them. Elsewhere, ISIL militants already control cities such as Mosul and have attacked towns near Iraq's capital of Baghdad. In addition, recent reports suggest ISIL has been helped by Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey, where wounded leaders have received treatment. Meanwhile, America's regional involvement has motivated the spread of Takfiri and Al-Qaeda ideology. Rumours are also rife, for example, that the United States and other Western states had advance warning of Takfiri attack plans. So what is going on in Iraq? How involved are other countries in the Takfiri advance? And to what extent is all this happening because of the decision by America and Britain to invade Iraq in 2003? These are the simple questions we sought to answer here in peaceful London. And we began by investigating how much people actually know about recent developments in Iraq. Here's what we found out. What do you know about what's happening in Iraq and why?
Well, I'm only following it on the news like everyone else, but it's pretty awful by any standards, isn't it? Deteriorating more and more, but every day, I think.
Not really much. I see it sometimes, but yeah, I don't really listen to it, so...
Well, what have you seen on the news?
Just like the war and stuff, fighting, yeah.
To be honest, I'm not really, I don't really take a great deal of notice of it. I mean, the Middle East generally seems to be a bit of a mess at the moment, doesn't it? So, yeah, it's gone on well. I think we should have gone to war in the first place. I agree with that. And, yeah, you know, it's continuing again, and I think if we need to go back, then so be it.
What's happening in Iraq and why?
At the moment, there's an insurgency, I believe from the north, going south. It's the ISIS movement. And, yeah, it's quite worrying because it'll probably lead to a civil war in Iraq.
What appeared to be a stable country after American and European involvement in stabilising the country appears that ISIL, or a group of kind of fundamentalists are attempting to retake the country. It seems to be a lot of instability there, a lot of, yeah.
Rebels taking over various locations strategically, and there seems to be very little that people in Iraq actually can do about it.
So that's what the public said, and varied knowledge. We turned to our experts for a roundup of recent developments and the actual situation in Iraq today.
Well, ISIL, they are known as Daesh in Iraq. In fact, they do nothing except killing, except destroying ancient remains, doing the nastiest thing you can imagine, killing children, slaughter them, and so on. It is basically because they don't like other people, particularly the Shias. In fact, the people who are rebellion in Iraq are not ISIL, but the normal, the ordinary Sunnis, in fact. Simply ISIS and Daesh, called Daesh, they are in front, that's all, in the picture, in the news.
I think that's a complicated question, because what's happening in Iraq, we've got Al-Qaeda, which is nowadays called Daesh, basically moving into Iraq from Mosul, which is the province is called Nineveh province, and it was a lightning fast attack. The whole army there out of the blue crumbled. The Al-Qaeda moved swiftly to Tikrit, and they tried to reach Samarra. They failed. The Iraqi army has today managed to retake Tikrit, which has a profound symbolic value, and basically is moving northwards to liberate other areas what caused it. I do believe that the writing was on the wall. All the indicators where that Al-Qaeda was preparing has reached a dramatic level of strength, power, prowess and influence came from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which were preparing the ground for such an attack.
Online video shows Takfiri militants massacring civilians and even beheading children. And yet, these are the same militants that seem to be getting support from the West in Syria. How does the public feel about that? Here's what they said. One of the things that seems to have happened is that the terrorists or the militants that the UK was sort of backing in Syria have now become the militants that UK is opposing in Iraq. So if that's happened, how do you feel about that kind of contradiction and the fact we were actually backing them at the beginning?
Yeah, I think you must be careful what you wish for. I mean, we went into invaded Iraq, and all we've done is open a complete sort of can of worms, and you know, it seemed that there was no consideration given to what was going to happen after this invasion. So, okay, they removed a tyrant, but there are more mini tyrants now.
It's always the case when you support one side. Sometimes it comes back to bite you, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, the reasons for supporting that side initially wasn't justified. It is, I would believe, it's probably one of those unplanned eventualities that you know, you don't have much control over that. But it doesn't mean that, you know, if a country needs help, therefore you cannot help because of those reasons.
Yeah, I think it's a very complicated picture. So I suspect there's people that have been supported by the West in the past who we might now regret, but it's such a complex picture that you never know how it's going to kind of pan out. So I don't think it's as simple as being one group of good guys and another group of bad guys. It's a much more complicated situation there.
Again, I think through history we've always changed who we're backing. I think we backed Saddam Hussein at one point, didn't we, against the Iranians? So it's often that we change to whoever's solves the immediate problem, isn't it? But we then reap what we sow later on.
So concerns amongst the public about the apparent contradiction in supporting these kinds of groupings in Syria and opposing them in Iraq. We turned to our experts to see if they could make sense of what looks like a very strange situation.
In the beginning, ISIS was not in the front. There were other groups. This is why the British government supported these groups, if you remember, because they didn't like Al-Assad. I don't want my money to go to groups like these at all. And this is why a lot of people are demanding the British government to change its policy, to change its mind, to change its attitude towards these people. And we are seeing this now.
That goes to say, and it shows some disgraceful behavior by the Western countries led by the United States, where they are absolutely complicit in what happened because they knew fully well and they were there on the ground, and that's according to the New York Times, which said and emphasized explicitly that most of the arming, funding, logistical support were actually going to the most extreme groups. That means the Al-Nusra Front. And Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was very clear, the leader of Al-Qaeda, when said the Nusra Front is simply an extension of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and all the resources that Al-Nusra has received have been shared by the two terrorist organizations. So that is why it's absolutely inexcusable, absolutely indefensible when so many lives have been wasted, atrocities has been committed, and you find out that the very people who claim to defend democracy and pretend that they are at the forefront of standing up for human rights are actually complicit in such crimes.
Many reports indicate that Israel has armed and assisted Takfiri terrorism in Syria, which of course now has spilled over into Iraq. Is it wise for Israel to get involved? What do the public think? Here's what they said. Quite a lot of reports suggest that Israel has been arming and assisting the militants in Syria, and of course the trouble's now spilled over into Iraq. If Israel has been involved, how do you feel about that?
It wouldn't surprise me, but the way it's going, I don't think anything surprises me with the whole thing. It's a powder keg that's been waiting to go off, and it looks like it has, and God knows where it's going to end.
I'm not sure it's necessarily relevant. I think all parties in the area have got some hand in it, and not just recently. I think the problem stems back decades, back to the Second World War and beyond, really, in terms of trying to fit borders round areas which were probably not appropriate in terms of the people who live there, who had no say in what country they got to be part of.
No, I don't, but then they often are, and they don't need to be.
Israel is said to have armed and assisted these same militants when they were in Syria, and that spilled into Iraq as well, of course. If Israel has been involved, how do you feel about that?
That's sad, because I believe that is the whole basic problem with the Middle East, is Israel, really. And it's very difficult to stop. It's not, there doesn't seem to be an end to that.
I think not really that wise, because you need to stop the terrorism. So it's not really that wise of them.
If Israel has done that, I'd like to know for what reason they've done it. Most things don't normally end up in oil. I'm not sure if that's, it just seems like so many wars over the last 100 years have been about that and greed. If they've assisted in that, then it's wrong. Again, it should be stopped, and we should do something to help stop it, I think.
So the public isn't completely convinced about the wisdom of Israel being involved in this situation. We turn to our experts to see what they felt about Israel getting involved in this very volatile situation.
Well, it's patently obvious for any country to help out terrorists. That's what George Bush has said, and it should be applicable anywhere in the world. If you support those terrorists, if you give them a safe haven, if you give them a sanctuary, then you are complicit in their crimes. That's what George W. Bush has said. And that should be applied to all the countries in the world which claim they are there to support, back up and stand up to human rights and democracy in the world.
Well, it is a well-known fact that Israel would like the Arab countries in general to be fractured, to each country to be in small areas, in small countries. For example, Syria, Israel wants Syria to be divided and fractured. Also wants Iraq to be fractured. This is one known fact. Even wants Saudi Arabia to be fractured.
Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair denies his Iraq invasion of 2003 has anything to do with the current troubles in the country. Effectively, he denies all responsibility for the current mess. Do the public agree? Do they believe him? Here's what they said. Tony Blair denies that his invasion in 2003 of Iraq has anything to do with the troubles today. Is that your view?
I never understood it at the time. I remember saying to my husband, I just don't understand this invasion of Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein was supposed to have had. And there was so much opposition to Tony Blair from other countries as well. And I said, well, OK, maybe there's something that we don't know that they can't tell us, the general public. But surely other leaders in other countries, in Europe, must have this same information. So why are they not backing it? And I just think Tony Blair saw it as his opportunity to do like a Falklands and become very popular like Margaret Thatcher did after invading the Falklands. But it didn't work out that way.
I don't think that is true. It has a lot to do with Iraq had a central government that was holding the people together. Yes, he was a brutal dictator. He was doing a lot of inhuman things to his people. But what happened after he left is it happened worse than what he could have done for years. So this is the result of the people being unleashed, and the central government has an absolute control of what's happening. And so it has to do with the invasion. Maybe there was another ways to tackle it, especially now we know that he did not have mass destruction weapons as being claimed before. So was it the right decision to go in there? I don't think so.
Tony Blair denies his 2003 invasion of Iraq has anything to do with what's happening there now. What's your view?
I think that's wrong.
Why is that?
Because obviously matters have escalated since then, since the so-called, was it weapons of mass destruction? And yeah,
which didn't exist, as it turned out.
Which didn't exist, but at the same time, okay, true. Saddam was probably a tyrant, sort of a dictator. But then again, there's a lot of involvement from the West in these countries. I mean, obviously we wouldn't be concerned with China because they're obviously a bigger power, and perhaps not so much oil there. So yeah, it's interesting.
I think it has everything to do with it, unfortunately. I think it was it's fundamentally the wrong thing to do. It was done, I'm fairly cynical about the role of big business and arms deals and security companies and profit and oil, and I think that's a far greater motivator for governments than people, and you know, looking after humanity is, unfortunately, and I think we reap what we sow. You know, we were the aggressor, and we expect them to roll over and take that, and why would they? We wouldn't.
So the public are quite sceptical about Tony Blair's claim that his actions in the invasion in 2003 are nothing to do with the current problems. Is there a real link between them? We asked our experts.
Tony Blair, of course, conspired with Bush to invade Iraq, and what we see now in Iraq is the result of the invasion. There is no question about it. Hundreds of thousands of people being killed, being maimed, being disabled, and so on. And the infrastructure of Iraq being destroyed. And even there is a kind of hidden war with these bombing and killing and so on for the last 11 years. All these caused by the invasion, no question about it. And Blair is responsible as Bush is responsible.
Tony Blair didn't prepare for the invasion. It was ill-prepared. It was the forces that went there were ill-equipped. It didn't have international United Nations resolutions backing up this invasion. And it was done for the wrong reasons. They prevented the Iraqi people from toppling Saddam. That was in 1991, and I do blame them for that. The United States, with all its allies, including France, Britain, who were there on the ground, Iraqi people rebelled against Saddam in 1991. And then they decided, after 10 years of imposing sanctions, those sanctions were basically there to punish the ordinary Iraqi people, and all of a sudden saying we're going after chemical weapons, which weren't there, by the way, in 2003, using it as a pretext to invade, occupy Iraq and leave it in a mess. He is responsible. He was the prime minister, so the buck stops with him.
The Takfiri militants' persecution of mainstream Muslims who do not share their views appears to have its ideology rooted in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. We wondered if the public would be surprised if there's a linkage between those countries and the deadly attacks in Iraq. Here's what they said. These militants who are persecuting Muslims who don't share their point of view seem to have an ideology that comes from Saudi Arabia and also from Qatar. How do you feel if it turned out those two countries were actually assisting with the trouble in Iraq?
Well, again, it's the same thing. Why do people want to get involved in other issues? There's probably other reasons behind it, you know, whether it be oil, trade, maybe religion, and politics. And it's, you know, one person's row with another person should get separate. You know, my view is that let them get on with it, and as long as it doesn't affect us, then obviously we'd have to jump in and sort it out, but otherwise, just leave them alone.
They probably are, and I feel pretty awkward about it because we seem to be bedfellows with all of these people and we pick and choose, but we just seem to be picking all the wrong people at the moment.
Saudi Arabia and Qatar may have something to do with the ideology which the militants are basing their fighting on. How would you feel if those countries were behind some of the attacks in Iraq, as if they were involved as well?
That's of great concern to us because of the business and financial implications. Yeah, we're involved, no matter whether we like it or not.
And do you like it?
No, I don't.
Should we get out?
In an ideal world, yes.
They are funding a lot of these attacks, sure, in Syria especially. It's coming from Saudi because obviously, like, due to the religion, due to the, it is a form of brainwashing of children, like in the madrasas in Pakistan. It does go on and it won't stop. So, yeah, I'm sure that's behind it. Yeah, of course.
So what is the linkage between the Tafriki ideology, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and is there also a connection between the violence in Iraq and those countries? We gave the final word to our experts.
It is very clear to people that Qatar and Saudi Arabia, true, maybe the government of Saudi Arabia and the government of Qatar is not involved directly, but definitely there is indirect involvement, particularly with money, particularly with the financial help. There is no question about it. But don't forget, I mean, Qaeda itself, the mother of ISIL, Daesh, sprang from Saudi Arabia and related to the Salafi and the Wahhabi, I mean the Wahhabist madhab and school of thought. So there is no question about it that the help is coming from Qatar and coming from Saudi Arabia, but I think also it is coming from Turkey. I am almost sure that Turkey is helping these people.
No, I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, I've been saying that for the last, God knows, 10 years, that they are heavily complicit. As I mentioned, the arming, the funding, the logistical support, the salaries to the Wahhabi Salafi mercenaries converging on Syria, joining up the Al-Nusra Front, joining up the Al-Qaeda in Iraq. According even to the NBC, that was in 2008, more than half of the mercenaries, the suicide bombing, carrying out suicide bombings right in the middle of civilian areas in Iraq, they come from Saudi Arabia. The fatwas, which are absolutely essential, coming from the Wahhabi Salafi establishment. The headquarters of Wahhabi Salafi establishment is based in Saudi Arabia, which is part and parcel of the regime. It is actually the Wahhabi Salafi establishment which gives, by its fatwas, the religious incentive, the religious justification, the religious coverage for those heinous crimes carried out against civilians and for the atrocities committed by Al-Qaeda in Iraq, also Al-Nusra Front, because they do rely on those fatwas. By the way, those fatwas are coming from clerics who are government employees. They are employed by the Saudi government. And we know Saudi Arabia is the major, it's the bastion of dictatorship, and they wouldn't be able to issue those fatwas without the full consent, full blessing from the Saudi regime, which benefits from them. So they are totally behind it. They have given their emphatic support and unequivocal backing to those groups. And those groups have basically been revitalized, rejuvenated because of the Saudi backing.
The terrorism in Iraq appears to have been caused by the aggressive policies of Western powers, coupled to support by Saudi Arabia and Persian Gulf states. And consider this, those Western powers fought an illegal war in Iraq under the pretext of peace and democracy. But instead they have achieved a country boiling over with violence and division. Indeed, one former Ba'ath Army general and other army men from Iraq's past are helping the ISIL advance. So, instead of bringing peace, the West has instead provoked a new and very unpredictable kind of war.